I woke up to the sound of rain tapping a window that shouldn't have existed. In my last memory, there was no rain, only fluorescent light, a conference room, and my own voice saying, "The numbers don't lie," right before the CEO's smile hardened and the fire alarm began to scream. When smoke filled the hallway, someone locked the emergency door from the outside. I remember the metal handle refusing to move. I remember the taste of plastic melting. And then I remember nothing until the rain in the window and a desk carved with old pen marks, dates, doodles, and a single cruel nickname written in thick ink like a scar. 18. Senior year. The city called Halewood. The school called Marlowe No. 2. The class called me a problem they could solve with a joke and 20 bills. In this life my name was Kira Lynn, and I knew what was coming because I had already lived the aftermath. The bell rang and the room woke up with it. Chairs scraped. Someone tossed a coin and laughed as if laughter was proof of power. In the back row, a boy with a designer jacket was holding court, offering dares the way rich kids offer snacks. He wasn't the center of the universe. He was the loudest lie in it. "Easy money," he said, waving a folded note, 20 for anyone who can get Kira to follow them behind the gym after school. The class erupted, not because the dare was clever, but because cruelty has the lowest entry fee. In the old timeline, I followed. In the old timeline, a phone camera clicked at the wrong angle and a rumor grew teeth. In the old timeline, I spent the next decade building armor out of work, certificates, and late-night buses, only to die in a locked hallway. This time, when the laughter rolled toward me like a wave, I let it pass. I lowered my head onto my arms and breathed as if I were asleep. Sleep, I had learned, can be a weapon. People reveal more when they think you are not listening. I listened. I listened to the boys bargaining over who would be the one to approach me. I listened to the girls pretending to be disgusted, while secretly hoping the attention would land somewhere else. I listened to the teacher in the next room complaining about budgets, as if budgets were an excuse for every failure. And beneath it all, I listened to my own stomach growl, because the same problem that had starved me 10 years ago was still waiting at home. Not hunger alone, but hunger controlled by someone who enjoyed counting it. My stepmother, Renee, kept ledgers the way other women kept photo albums. She tracked every bite as if food were a favor I had to earn, and she treated my father's silence like a signature. The house had rules. I was allowed to study, but not to shine. I was allowed to live, but not to cost. My half-sister, Micah, was allowed everything, and she wore that allowance like perfume. At lunch, I didn't reach for charity. I reached for strategy. I walked to the vending machines where cameras were mounted above the ceiling tiles. Cameras in schools were supposed to deter theft. They never deterred the people with power, but they recorded anyway. I positioned myself where the lens would catch my face clearly, then pulled my phone and started a recording memo. A habit from my other life. If you can't control what people say, control what you can prove. I spoke softly into the mic, narrating the hour, the date, the classroom dare. I said names. I said the phrase financial coercion, like I was already writing the report. Then I ended the memo and saved it to 3 places: local, cloud, and an encrypted app. The first time I died, I learned that a single copy is not a plan. It is a hope. After school, the boy in the designer jacket, Evan Rook, strolled up to my desk as if he owned my timetable. He tried to look casual, tried to make his voice sound bored. "Kira," he said, "come with me. I've got something for you." I lifted my head and met his eyes, letting him see exactly how little I cared about his performance. "I'm hungry," I said. "Buy me dinner." His mouth twitched. He wasn't expecting conditions. Bullies depend on predictable compliance. "Fine," he said, offended. "But then you come." "Sure," I replied, because I intended to go just not where he thought. We walked out together, and the hallway filled with whispers behind us like static. I chose a greasy noodle shop by the bus stop, the kind of place that smelled like chili oil and second chances. Evan looked disgusted by the cracked vinyl seats. He ordered nothing, watching me eat as if my hunger were a character flaw. I ate slowly, deliberately, because I remembered what it felt like to swallow too fast when you don't know the next meal is coming. When I was done, he leaned forward, impatience sharpening his smile. "Now," he said, "behind the gym." I tilted my head. "Not behind the gym," I said. "Somewhere with privacy. A motel is fine." Evan's pupils widened. His ego flared. He mistook my calm for consent. He mistook my age for naivety. That mistake would cost him. The motel was 2 streets over, neon sign flickering like a tired heartbeat. Evan paid at the counter with the careless ease of someone who had never worried about consequences. In the room, he fidgeted, suddenly shy in the face of reality. He wasn't brave. He was curious, and curiosity with an audience becomes cruelty. I told him, "Go shower. You smell like smoke from the court." He scoffed but obeyed, disappearing into the bathroom. The moment the water started, I moved. I opened his bag. I found what I expected: cash, a spare phone, and a compact camera. The camera was the real weapon, not the money. It had been in the old timeline too. I didn't break it. Broken things make noise. Instead, I replaced it, slid my own identical-looking camera from my backpack into his bag, and took his camera with me. I also took half his cash. Not because I wanted his money, but because I wanted his attention focused on the wrong loss. Then I made one call to a woman whose phone number I had memorized from the sticker on the salon downstairs. A stranger to him, a witness for me. "Room 214, I said. "Bring your phone. I'll pay." I didn't explain more. People don't need your story to help you. They need your certainty. When the knock came, it came at the same time Evan stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, confidence returning because he believed he was in control. He turned toward the bed, and I turned on the lamp. The salon woman's camera flash lit the room like lightning. Evan froze, pupils shrinking, brain scrambling for a version where he still won. The woman started to curse at me, confused, until I held up a bill and said, 10 photos. No faces of me, only him. You'll be paid." She hesitated, then did what working people do. She followed the contract. Evan exploded, shouting numbers like they were threats. 1 photo, 1,000, he yelled, as if price could erase embarrassment. I tossed his wallet onto the bed. "Pay her," I said. "I already took my share." Then I walked out. I didn't run. Running makes you look guilty. I walked like a person finishing an errand. In the hallway, my heart didn't pound. It kept a steady rhythm like a metronome. I wasn't fearless. I was prepared. And preparation is louder than courage. The next day, Evan arrived late to class, face bruised with rage and humiliation. Word traveled fast. His father had been called. The motel had filed a complaint. The salon woman had demanded payment. And the school, terrified of scandal, had begged Evan's family to keep things quiet. Quiet meant settlement. Quiet meant Evan's father didn't ask why his son was in a motel with a classmate. Quiet meant everyone wanted the story to die before it grew into headlines. Evan glared at me like I had stolen his future. I returned the look and smiled. Small and sharp, he tried to bait me with insults. I let them fall. Insults are cheap when you hold evidence. But Evan wasn't my main problem. Evan was a symptom, a boy trained to treat others as disposable. My main problem was home. Renee noticed my appetite change immediately. She noticed because she watched for weakness the way some people watch weather. "Where are you eating?" she asked that night, voice sweet. "School," I lied. Lies are tools. The danger is forgetting they are. Renee searched my room while I showered. She didn't find money because I didn't keep money in my room. In my other life, I learned the safest hiding place is never where people expect. I had taped bills inside the hollow back of an old dictionary in the library, because Renee never touched books unless she needed to throw them away. Renee's daughter, Micah, was quicker. She cornered me in the hallway and smiled like a blade. "You have money," she said. "I can smell it. Mom will get it. She always does." I stared at her and felt nothing, no fear, no anger, only calculation. "Try," I said, "and see what happens." Micah laughed. "You're still just Kira," she replied. "Dad will choose us. He always does." The worst part was that she was right. Fathers like mine don't choose. They drift toward the loudest demand and call it peace. On Monday, Renee stormed into my homeroom, performing heartbreak-like theater. She accused me of stealing cash from her wallet, of buying shameful things, of dishonoring my dead mother. She said the word mother with her mouth while her eyes said weapon. The class watched, hungry for a spectacle that would prove their world was still predictable. In the old timeline, I would have cried. I would have begged. This time, I stood and said, "You can search my bag. You can search my desk. You won't find anything because I didn't steal." Renee lunged for my desk anyway, scattering notebooks. The teacher tried to stop her. Renee cried louder. People mistake volume for truth. In the staff office, Renee kept crying while she told a neat little story about a troubled stepdaughter and a saintly mother figure. The counselor frowned at me as if I were already guilty. I waited. Then I asked one question. "Do you have proof?" Renee said. "I have a missing 500. I nodded. "Then call the police," I said. "If you won't, it means you know the story won't survive evidence." Renee's tears stopped for half a beat. That pause was the real confession. The counselor tried to smooth it over, suggesting family discussion. I smiled. "Family discussion is what people say when they want the victim to go home quietly," I replied. "I'm not going quietly." That night, Renee destroyed my bed, soaked my blankets, poured detergent over my pillow, and claimed it was an accident. Micah watched from the door, satisfied. My father came home late and asked why the room smelled like soap. Renee said, "Kira has cleanliness issues." My father nodded, believing whatever required the least energy. When my period came and I had no money for supplies, Renee smiled at the pantry and said, "You should learn discipline." I learned something else instead, that the people who starve you will also lecture you about gratitude. I bought what I needed with money hidden in my dictionary, and I wrote down every date, every withheld expense, every lie. In my other life, I had put criminals in handcuffs with spreadsheets. In this one, I would start with a notebook. The countdown to the national exam began, and the entire school turned into a pressure cooker. Teachers shouted about destiny. Students pretended they weren't terrified. Renee pretended she cared, because if I failed, she could keep me trapped longer. She began to soften her tone, offering me fruit, offering me rides, offering me fake forgiveness, like bait. I refused every offer. The most dangerous moment in an abusive system is when it notices you're leaving. That's when it tries to smile you back into the cage. I moved into the dorms. My father threatened to cut me off. I laughed because being cut off from nothing is not a threat. The dorms were not kind either. Rumors had already infected the room assignments. Mika had whispered to a dance major roommate that I was a thief, that I seduced boys for cash. The roommate threw my water bottle into the toilet. I watched her do it without blinking. Then I lifted all 3 roommates' toothbrush cups and dropped them into the same toilet. "If you want filth," I said calmly, "we can share." They screamed. I didn't. The screaming stopped after that, because bullies prefer easy targets, not mirrors. Mika escalated. She sent an older boy from a neighboring school to scare me on a weekend night, hoping fear would make me miss study sessions. He grabbed me near the trees behind the lecture hall, hand over my mouth, breath sour with cheap alcohol. I had expected this. I carried a box cutter in my pocket and a loud personal alarm clipped to my bag strap. When his face dipped close, I sliced his cheek not deep, but enough to draw blood and panic. He cursed and slapped me, then tried to pin me. I hit the alarm. The sound shattered the night like glass. Footsteps thundered. Someone tackled him from behind an unexpected force. Not a hero, not a savior, but Evan Rook. Evan wasn't brave either. He was angry. Angry that someone else was trying to ruin me, because he still believed my ruin belonged to him. He fought the boy anyway. The boy fled when lights turned on and a security guard shouted. Police arrived. Statements were taken. Micah arrived too, eyes wide and innocent, playing the sister who cares. The older boy claimed he was only pranking me at a girl's request. He said Micah's name. Mika cried and said he was obsessed with her, lying to impress. Renee arrived and turned it into a misunderstanding. My father arrived and begged the officers to keep it quiet because a girl's reputation matters. I watched my father sign a mediation form that effectively forgave the attacker on my behalf. My hand shook not from fear, but from rage, finally waking up. Rage is an emotion I rarely felt cleanly, but it was there now, bright and hot. I turned to my father and said, "Choose." He blinked. "Choose between me and them?" he asked, baffled. "Why are you like this?" I answered. "Because you taught me that silence is permission." Then I walked away. In my other life, I had returned home once, hoping time had softened him. He hadn't even recognized me. I wouldn't give him a second chance to fail the first one. 1 week before the exam, I disappeared into a hotel near school, telling nobody. In the old timeline, Renee locked me in the bathroom during the first test session. I had climbed out a third-floor window, hands sliced by glass, then written essays with blood smearing the paper. I failed. I ran away south. I survived. I succeeded. But the price was brutal, and it didn't have to be. This time, I removed the door before it could lock. Evan found me anyway, sniffing out my trail like a dog. He stood in the hotel hallway, hands shoved in pockets, face unreadable. "Why are you hiding?" he asked. "Because I'm tired of traps," I replied. He hesitated. "I can lend you money," he said, like it was a gift. I took it without gratitude. "Loan," I corrected, with terms. The exam arrived. I walked into the room with my pencil case, my ID, and my entire past like a stone in my pocket. I wrote calmly. I answered questions like I was closing accounts. When I walked out into the sunlight, I felt no triumph, only relief, as if I had finally stepped out of a hallway with no locks. Renee and my father waited outside the gate, holding Micah's hand, pretending to be a family. My father said, "Come home." I asked, "Where is my home?" He frowned, offended that I had asked the truth out loud. I turned and left. Results came. I ranked high enough to enter my chosen university in a southern coastal capital. Micah bragged about going to a dance academy, a path paved with money and excuses. Renee told people she had raised a top student, as if my brain were her achievement. My father waited for me to apologize, because fathers like mine think obedience is love. I didn't apologize. I booked a train ticket the day my admission letter arrived. I packed light. I left early. The platform smelled like diesel and possibility. Evan ran up the stairs, breathless. "So that's it?" he demanded. "You're just going?" I nodded. "Yes," he shouted. "After everything I did, after I saved you, He didn't finish, because he didn't know what he wanted to be to me. Savior? Owner? Friend? I looked at him and said, "I don't owe you an ending." On the train, I stared at my reflection in the dark window and felt the strangest thing. A quietness that wasn't numbness, it was ownership. I didn't need revenge that looked like screaming. I wanted revenge that looked like living. In my other life, I built myself from dishwashing shifts, cramped rentals, and the constant vigilance of a girl who slept with a knife under her pillow. I learned numbers. I learned laws. I learned how fraud hides behind affection. In this life, I would start earlier. I would start cleaner. At university, I studied audio engineering and forensic computing not because it sounded glamorous, but because I had discovered something in the years between lives. The world was moving toward lies that sounded real. Deepfakes weren't only faces. They were voices, whispers, recordings that could ruin a reputation in seconds. And I had lived through a rumor once. I knew how quickly a single clip could rewrite a person's life. So I decided to become the kind of person who could prove what was true. My first job wasn't in a glossy office. It was in a small lab that partnered with public defenders and schools, analyzing malicious recordings used to blackmail students. My supervisor, a strict woman named Dr. Sato, liked facts more than feelings. She liked me. I built models that detected splice points, compression artifacts, and room tone inconsistencies. I learned that lies leave fingerprints in frequencies most people never notice. I also learned that bullies evolve. They don't stop. They upgrade. 2 years later, a case landed on my desk with a familiar smell. A viral audio clip supposedly featuring a girl from Marlow No. 2, begging for money and offering herself in return. The clip spread through group chats like disease. The girl's name was not mine, but it could have been. The pattern of cruelty was identical. The file's metadata had been scrubbed, but the waveform told a story. Cut and paste edits, mismatched background hum, and a synthetic voice layer stitched over a real one. I proved it was fake. The platform removed it. The boy who posted it insisted it was just a joke. The law didn't laugh. That was when I received a call from my father. His voice was older, rougher. He said Renee asked for me. I laughed once, not kindly. "Why?" I asked. He said Mika had been injured overtraining, a fall, a wheelchair. Renee was desperate for money. My father said the word desperate as if it were an apology. I asked, "Is this the part where you remember I exist?" He went quiet. I could picture him standing in the same kitchen where he had watched me starve. "Kira," he whispered, "you have money now." I replied, "Yes, and you taught me why I need it." I didn't go home. I didn't send money. I sent one thing instead. A legal letter, drafted by the clinic my lab partnered with, outlining past coercion, medical neglect, and harassment. I attached my logs. I attached my recordings from senior year. I attached the security report from the attempted assault. I wasn't seeking punishment. I was seeking distance. Formalized. Renee replied with a string of insults that proved the letter had hit its target. My father replied with nothing. Silence. Again. But this time, silence didn't trap me. It freed me. Years passed. I became known in my field as a memory architect. Someone who could take messy human disaster and reconstruct the truth in clean lines. I testified in hearings. I trained school administrators to handle harassment without blaming victims. I built tools that flagged coercive language in family agreements and scholarship documents. Sometimes I wondered whether the 18-year-old Kira, who had once believed $20 was survival, would recognize me. I think she would. Not because I became soft, but because I became safe. Safety was the most radical gift I ever gave myself. On my 30th birthday, I bought a slice of cake and ate it slowly at my own table. No one counted my bites. No one watched for weakness. My phone rang an international number. Evan Rook. I hadn't heard his voice in years. "Happy birthday," he said, quieter than I remembered. I laughed. "You tracked me that long?" He exhaled. I wanted to say, "You were right. I wasn't a savior. I was a kid with money and no shame." I didn't forgive him with fireworks. I said, "I know." He asked, "Are you happy?" I looked around my small apartment, my tidy shelves, my work files, my life that belonged to me. And I answered honestly, "I'm alive on purpose." When the call ended, I stared out the window at the city lights and felt something close to peace. Not the peace my father chased, the kind that requires someone else to swallow pain. This was a different peace. Earned, documented, defended. In my first life, I died because someone locked a door. In this life, I learned how to build doors that open and how to make sure nobody can lock them from the outside again. Between the lab's cases and my own legal boundaries, I had to learn a skill no textbook teaches: how to be a person when you've spent years being a project. In Halewood, every day had been survival math. At university, the danger changed but didn't vanish. It arrived as professors who expected young women to be grateful for condescension, classmates who treated hard stories like collectible badges, and administrators who wanted to tout diversity while ignoring the cost of keeping someone safe. I started saying no. No to unpaid opportunities. No to interviews that wanted tears. No to people who asked me to tell them everything and offered nothing but their curiosity in return. Money remained a practical problem. Scholarships covered tuition, not groceries, not transit, not the quiet fees hidden inside success, software licenses, lab supplies, the suit you need to look credible when you testify. I built an income the way I built my evidence-redundant streams. I tutored underclassmen in statistics. I repaired audio equipment for a campus station. I did weekend shifts at a community theater, learning more about acoustics from old stagehands than from any lecture. I saved receipts for everything, because receipts are a kind of autobiography when people try to rewrite your life. In my second semester, a dean attempted to reassign my scholarship after a donor complained my research was too political. The donor wanted my work to focus on entertainment audio, not on weaponized recordings that threatened the donor's industry friends. The dean called me into an office and spoke in the careful language of concern. He said I could keep my funding if I adjusted my topic. He framed it as flexibility. I framed it as censorship. I asked for the policy in writing. He didn't have it. I asked him to confirm the donor's request via email. He refused. I sent my own email summarizing the conversation and copied the scholarship board. The dean replied with a half-denial that functioned as an admission. My funding stayed. The dean avoided me afterward. Avoidance is one of the few honest responses power offers when it fails. That incident changed how I understood institutions. They don't only fail through neglect, they also fail through quiet bargains. People exchange your future for their comfort, then call it pragmatism. I began teaching workshops for other scholarship students on what I called paperwork self-defense, how to write recap emails, how to request records, how to use student ombuds offices, how to keep the tone professional while building a trail. Some students looked embarrassed to need the advice. I told them there is no shame in needing tools. Shame belongs to the people who create the traps. My work in synthetic audio detection started small. One project in a borrowed lab, then expanded after a regional news anchor was targeted. Someone released an audio clip of her supposedly admitting she took bribes. The station suspended her to investigate. Sponsors panicked. The anchor's career began to collapse in hours. I examined the clip and found something elegant and damning. The background noise contained a faint electrical hum inconsistent with the anchor's studio. The hum matched a common modeling microphone used by a particular podcast network. The clip wasn't recorded in the studio at all. It was built from older public broadcasts and spliced with synthetic phonemes. I presented the analysis to the station's counsel. The station reinstated her and sued for defamation. The podcast network, embarrassed and angry, tried to claim they were victims too. Then the police served a warrant on a producer who had access to the network's equipment. A man who thought he could manufacture reality was introduced to a reality he couldn't edit. Cases like that attracted attention from people who needed the truth but didn't want the publicity of asking for it. A youth shelter asked me to train staff on identifying coercive recordings used in trafficking schemes. A union asked me to audit a company's anonymous hotline system after whistleblowers reported their voices were being recognized and punished. I discovered the hotline vendor had been storing unencrypted audio and sharing access credentials among subcontractors. The company called it a vendor mistake. I called it negligence. The company fired the vendor and rebuilt the system. More importantly, the company created a policy that forbade retaliatory investigations based on voice recognition. That policy protected people I would never meet. That, to me, was the point. While I was building procedures for others, I had to build something softer for myself. Community that wasn't transactional. I found it in ordinary places. In a neighborhood library where a retired engineer volunteered and asked me about my work without asking me about my trauma. In a tiny cafe where the owner learned my order and never asked why I flinched at shouting. In Dr. Sato's dry humor, which was her way of saying she trusted me. I learned that safety is not only locks and cameras, it is also consistent kindness without strings. My grandmother became part of that consistency. She didn't pressure me to forgive. She didn't romanticize my mother's choices. She simply told the truth as she knew it and made space for mine. When I spoke about Renee, my grandmother didn't say, "But she's family." She said, "Then she should have acted like it." Her bluntness felt like medicine. The closer I came to stability, the more I understood why Renee had worked so hard to keep me small. If you control someone's food, you control their attention. If you control their reputation, you control their movement. If you control their fear, you control their future. My ledger was not only a record of harm, it was a map of control. And maps, once drawn, show you where to cut. When my restraining order against Renee became final, my father tried one last time to reach me in email with no greeting, only a sentence. "Your sister needs help." I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied with a list of local social services and medical resources, and a single line. "Do not contact me again unless it is about legal compliance." It wasn't cruelty. It was boundary. Some families treat boundaries as betrayal. I treated them as survival. A month later, my grandmother received a postcard from Micah. It was brief, almost blank. "Tell Kira I'm sorry," it said, as if apology were something you could mail without postage. I didn't know what kind of person Micah had become. Perhaps she was still cruel. Perhaps pain had changed her. I didn't chase the answer. I told my grandmother, if she wants to apologize, she knows how to write like an adult. Then I went back to work, because closure is not a requirement for a life. In the years that followed, I stopped thinking of my past as a monster under the bed and started thinking of it as training data. Painful, biased, but useful if you refuse to let it dictate the outcome. I taught interns how to treat evidence like a living thing, handle it gently, preserve its shape, never contaminate it with what you wish were true. I taught myself the same lesson about memory. I could remember the locked door without living inside it. I could remember the motel lamp without mistaking it for a love story. I could remember Evan's entitlement without turning it into my identity. And when rain tapped my window at night, I didn't hear a warning anymore. I heard time, moving forward. Later, the story people wanted to tell about me tried to harden into something simple. A girl humiliated, a girl brave, a girl who overcame. I refused that version, because simplicity is another kind of theft. What happened in Halewood wasn't a motivational arc. It was a sequence of systems failing on schedule. A school that treated cruelty as weather. A home that treated food as leverage. A father who treated silence as neutrality. A boy who treated attention as entitlement. And a future office where risk mattered more than air in a burning hallway. I didn't need strangers to clap for my survival. I needed fewer locked doors. So I built my next years, like I built my evidence, piece by piece, with redundancies, At university, I chose audio engineering and forensic computing, not because I loved machines more than people, but because lies had learned to imitate people. Rumors used to travel by whispers. Now they traveled by files. A clip could be edited. A voice could be synthesized. A confession could be fabricated. And I had already lived one life where a single angle on a phone camera became a decade-long punishment. In the lab, I learned to read truth in the quiet seams, the wrong room tone under a sentence, the unnatural consistency of a synthetic breath, the compression artifacts that appear when audio is cut and resaved too cleanly. Reality has texture. Fake stories try to sand it away. My supervisor, Dr. Sato, didn't care about my past. She cared about whether I could prove my claims. She taught me the discipline of testimony. State what you know, show how you know it, stop there. She also taught me that victims are often asked to perform pain to be believed, while perpetrators are allowed to perform calm to look credible. I learned to keep my voice level and let the graphs speak. When a defense attorney tried to call me biased, I asked him to point to a bias in the spectrogram. He couldn't. He looked angry anyway. Anger without evidence is noise. The first time my work protected someone, I felt something in my chest loosen. A high school junior had been targeted by a boyfriend who created a fake audio of her agreeing to meet for sex and money. The clip was shared through group chats and posted in a forum that loved humiliation. The girl stopped attending class. Her mother stopped sleeping. The school called it drama. Dr. Sato called it extortion. I proved the audio was stitched from 3 separate recordings and a synthetic overlay. The platform removed it. The boy's phone was seized. The prosecutor filed charges. The girl returned to school without smiling. But she returned. That mattered more than any smile. After graduation, I joined a small civic lab partnered with public defenders and schools. The work was not glamorous. It was folders, subpoenas, and long hours under fluorescent lights. But I liked work that changed outcomes, not opinions. I kept a running ledger not of money, but of patterns. Who tries to isolate a target, who uses jokes as cover, who recruits friends to spread a lie, who escalates when ignored. Patterns repeat because they work. The only way to stop them is to make them expensive. That was when my past tried to re-enter my present. My father called from an unfamiliar number, voice older and brittle. He said Renee wanted to speak to me. He didn't say my name with warmth. He said it like a task. I asked why, and he admitted Mika was injured overtraining. A fall, a long recovery. Money had become urgent. Urgency was Renee's favorite costume. In the old life, I would have rushed home, hoping to finally earn something like love. In this life, I recognized the pattern. Control disguised as family. I told him I would not discuss money over the phone. I offered a single option instead. Written communication through counsel. Renee sent messages anyway, alternating between sweetness and venom. She called me ungrateful, called me dirty, called me selfish, called me still just Kira. Then she tried a new angle. She claimed my mother had owed her money, that my mother had been unstable, that Renee had saved me from becoming like her. I read the messages and felt the same calm I had felt in the motel hallway. Renee wanted emotion. Emotion makes people negotiate with wolves. I opened my old notebook, now thick with dates, and I added each message to my archive. Then I drafted a timeline. Withheld necessities, search of my room, public accusations at school, the mediated assault, the pressure on my exam week, the attempts to bait me back. I attached what I had. Recordings, witnesses, reports, and a statement from the dorm security guard. My counsel sent Renee a cease and desist and a notice. Any further harassment would be treated as retaliation and reported. My father didn't respond. Silence again. But the silence had changed. In the past, his silence had been a wall that trapped me inside the house. Now, it was simply a noise I no longer had to interpret. I wasn't trying to fix him. Fixing him was not my job. My job was to build a life where his failures couldn't reach me. Evan Rook tried to reach me too, years later, in a way that surprised me. He didn't show up at my door. He sent a short email through a professional address, asking if we could talk. I agreed to one call with boundaries. His voice had lost some arrogance. He told me he had been expelled after a second scandal, one not involving me, but involving a girl whose parents refused to keep things quiet. His father had paid settlements until the payments stopped working. Evan said, "I thought money could erase consequences." I said, "Money can buy time. It can't buy innocence." He was quiet. then asked if I hated him. I answered honestly. I didn't. Hate is a tether. I had cut the tether. Evan said, softer. I'm sorry. I replied. Then be different. And I ended the call. The civic lab grew. We started training school administrators to treat harassment as an incident with evidence, not a gossip problem. We taught students how to document threats without escalating danger. Screenshots with headers, metadata preserved, devices secured, witnesses notified. We published a guide for families trapped in financial discipline that was actually deprivation. How to track withheld funds, how to request records, how to seek emergency support without alerting the abuser. I titled that section No Second Locks, because I had learned the worst locks are the ones people pretend aren't there. In my second year, I was asked to testify in a state hearing about synthetic media. The room was full of suited people who liked theory. I spoke about practice. I described the texture of truth, the way real rooms breathe differently than fake ones. I described how a rumor becomes a hallway with no exits when institutions choose comfort over facts. When a senator asked if I believed kids today are too sensitive, I looked at him and said, sensitivity isn't the problem, impunity is. The room went quiet. Quiet can be a gift when it belongs to you. After the hearing, a journalist offered to profile me, calling me the girl who came back with a ledger. I refused the headline. I told her the ledger wasn't a symbol. It was a method. She insisted the public needed heroes. I told her the public needed procedures. She wrote the article anyway, smaller than she wanted, and focused on the lab's work rather than my origin story. That was acceptable. I learned to accept imperfect allies when their direction was right. The closest thing to closure came not through a dramatic confrontation, but through paperwork. Renee, angry at losing access to me, tried to sabotage my reputation in a way that matched her imagination. She contacted my employer, claiming I stole from family funds and that I was mentally unstable. It was a familiar script. My employer forwarded the email to counsel and asked me if I wanted to respond. I said yes with exhibits. We filed a formal complaint for harassment and interference with employment. We requested a restraining order. In court, Renee tried to cry. She tried to perform the saintly stepmother again, but the judge asked for evidence. Renee had feelings. I had timestamps. The restraining order was granted. Mika never appeared. Perhaps she was still injured. Perhaps she was ashamed. Perhaps she was simply busy living the life she had been handed. I stopped wondering. Wondering was another tether. I had learned that being chosen by a grandmother or a friend matters more than being resented by a sister. That sentence surprised me as I thought it. Because in this life I did have a grandmother, my mother's